is being recorded.
Thank you for taking the time out of your schedules today to join us for this very important topic, prevention and recovery from ransomware, being presented today by Ontrack and NetApp. My name is Troy Hager, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm a senior business development manager at Ontrack and have been in the data recovery industry for over 25 years. Just a couple quick notes to start with. We are recording this webinar today, so it can be made available offline to others that aren't able to join. Also, during the presentation, you'll be muted, but certainly if you have questions throughout the presentation, please click the chat bubble at the bottom of the WebEx screen and post your question in the chat bar on the right-hand side, and we'll get to as many questions as we can during and at the end of the presentation. Today's presenters are David Logue from Ontrack.
Good morning.
Dave's an operations manager. Oh, hi, Dave. Dave's an operations manager and lead enterprise and remote data recovery engineer, and he's been with Ontrack for over 19 years. Also presenting today is Matt Trudwind from NetApp. Hi, Matt.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, hey, thanks for having me.
Matt's a technical marketing engineer and primarily focuses on portfolio security in the areas such as governance and security best practices. And Matt has expertise as well on NetApp's ONTAP product line. Matt's been with NetApp for over 7 years. So our objectives of what we'd like to accomplish today are really to give you a better understanding of what ransomware is and an inside look on how it works, as well as how to prevent it, mitigate it, and recover from it. In addition to actions you can take in the event you or your company are hit by ransomware. And really, if there's one thing we hope you take away from today's session, it's to raise awareness around ransomware. And we hope that you consider creating a proactive plan of action ahead of time for if and when ransomware hits, so you're not scrambling at the last moment. So the agenda for the webinar today is really going to be to discuss the results of a recent ransomware survey conducted by Ontrack. We'll also overview the current ransomware threat landscape of today, as well as how to protect, mitigate, and recover from ransomware, and really when to engage others for help. And also, as I mentioned, we'll leave time at the end for Q&A, so please post those questions to the chat if you would. So first off, let's talk a little bit about the ransomware survey. So in December of 2019, Ontrack conducted a ransomware survey in the US to primarily CEOs, CIOs, and IT department managers of large enterprises and small to medium businesses. So let's take a look at a few of those results. When asked if it's important to be prepared for a ransomware attack, half of the respondents said yes, it's definitely important to be prepared. But 1/3 said it's actually their highest priority within their IT security organization. Even though half of the respondents said they have an emergency plan in place, a full 1/3 said they do not have a plan in place at all. So that's pretty amazing. And those that have been hit by ransomware, a whopping 50% said their backups were either out of date or they had no backup at all. So pretty amazing there. And of those, over 1/3 ended up paying the ransom fee.
It's kind of frightening, isn't it, Troy?
Yeah, it sure is. So again, preparedness is one of the goals of why we're here today. So those are some pretty telling statistics of the importance of being prepared, having backups, and having a plan in place. So now I'm going to turn it over to Matt from NetApp to talk about how ransomware actually infects computers and to provide some stats on the current ransomware threat landscape, along with some cost stats. Matt's also going to show a pretty cool demo of how ransomware infects a computer. So you get to see it firsthand, and he'll also demonstrate how quickly you can recover from it if you have the right environment in place. So Matt, please take it away, sir.
Thanks a lot, Troy. So I appreciate everyone having me here today, and I definitely want to, first of all, I want to level set with you guys about what ransomware really is. I know we've all heard about it a lot in the news, but let's see if we can just recap this real briefly here. So when you think about ransomware, we all have, ways of accessing files, whether it be through our tablets, our phones, desktops, what have you. And those files are pretty important for businesses. And it can also be databases or anything you think about. But the hacker out there, what he is trying to do is actually use malware. Ransomware is really just malware underneath, but it's how the malware is used that makes it ransomware. And he tries to get it on your system. Once the system is there, it actually creates an encryption process that will run typically as an executable and encrypt your files. So you can no longer access those critical files. When that happens, he says, okay, if you go ahead and give me some money, I had this decryption key. And if you give me some money, I'll go ahead and give that to you. You see the coins there. Typically, it's a Bitcoin they use a lot. And then once the decryption key is provided, in theory, you can decrypt the data. Now, in general, they do want to encourage the behavior of getting paid, but I've ran into examples before where you get the decryption key, it couldn't actually decrypt the data. They reach back out to the hacker and say, hey, we paid you, what happened here? It turns out the decryption key actually needed an update, or the malware rather needed an update, a patch. So we're getting to the point where you even have to patch the malware sometimes to get it to run. And as David will touch on later, he's seen some other very interesting situations where that decryption key doesn't always necessarily work.
Hey, Matt.
But that's
this Dave. We saw that the other day. I don't know if you've seen this one as well. There was a hacker that was out there. He had a ransomware package that was out there, and he was offering a 10% discount on the ransom fee for anybody that would leave a positive review for him. So because he was trying to build credibility to say, yeah, I really will respond. I really will decrypt your files. If you give me a positive review on this feedback site, I will give you 10% discount on your ransom that you're paying to me. I mean, isn't that crazy that a criminal's asking you for positive feedback? Like give me a Yelp review, that I'm a good criminal, not a bad criminal, because I actually do what I said I do after I stole all your data.
That's crazy. But at the end of the day, still a criminal, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, let's try to help our customers and everyone else on here today that's joining avoid some of that. To better understand kind of this cost of ransomware, what is the real cost? So you have, maybe you lost some servers or workstations, you might have to rebuild, paying the ransom. We just talked about that. There could be a discount, and it might work, sometimes it might not. But the real cost of ransomware is actually downtime. When you think about the average ransomware payment in Q4 of 2019, that was about $84,000 per incident. Each incident was about $84,000. But when you factor in the downtime can really range there. You can see that the average ransomware incident lasted over 16 days. And depending on your particular business, 16 days could be very impactful. They found out on average it was anywhere from 5x to 15x, and you're looking at basically millions of dollars just from the downtime, the cost of not being able to do business. And that is the real cost of ransomware. So don't get sidetracked just by the ransomware payment. Let's say the decryption key does come in and you are able to decrypt the data. How long is it going to take that attacker to give you the key once he's gotten the money? Again, you don't want to depend on them. You want to have a plan of your own. We're going to take a look at some metrics here. This is from the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. This is the 2019 version. They release this every year to give you general trends in security, what's going on in the industry. But ransomware in particular here would be classified in the incidents. It's not classified as a breach because with breaches, you have to confirm there was data loss. Sometimes, obviously, ransomware, typically you get it back, but not always. But 70% of malware attacks in healthcare are in fact ransomware. And we talked about how really ransomware is just malware underneath. You can see healthcare and finance are particularly targeted here, making up 25% of the total. And 71% of the motivations for these hackers is actually financially motivated. That's the reason why they're trying to get paid. And sometimes it can take months to discover the ransomware in your environment. It can lay dormant for a while. It might not activate for a while, and that's when we talk about having backups later on, why that's so important to have a good strategy there if it takes months to discover. Another thing to point out is a lot of the news stories you may read about ransomware could be city, local, state government, those type of things. The public sector is definitely an area that's targeted, and the reason why is a lot of those public sector entities don't necessarily have great budgets for being prepared for ransomware. And so that's why you may have seen that in some of the news. Let's take a look at how ransomware has changed over the years. Are things getting better or worse? I think this will tell the tale here. The first incident of ransomware that is generally known happened in 1989. And there was an AIDS conference at the time, several attendees to the conference, and someone was able to get the full list of attendees. What they did is they took a floppy disk. If you remember back enough then in the 80s, I know I was around those days, but back then floppy disks were pretty useful. So all the attendees actually received a floppy disk that had AIDS patient data, or so they thought. Turned out it locked them out from their files on their PC, and they were not able to access those unless they sent payment to a PO box. And then the attacker would tell them how to unlock their data. Turns out he registered the PO box in his name, so it was very easy to find that attacker for authorities, and so they were able to shut that down pretty quick. But jump all the way back up to 2005, and that's where we first see file encrypting ransomware, where you couldn't actually access the files. And jump another 5 years, and the payment method changed to premium text. I know back in that time, I remember you had to actually pay for a lot of text, especially multimedia texting. And we jump a little bit ahead now to 2013, and we see Bitcoin show up for payment for the very first time with crypto law there. And you can see there's some pretty big gaps near the beginning, and then we're starting to get a little closer in time. We look at the last 6 or 7 years or so, and you can see we have new variants, new big items, ticket items in ransomware every year. 2016, we had the first Mac OS ransomware, so it's not just Windows systems that are vulnerable to this. 2017, we've got the WannaCry virus, and we're actually going to touch on that more later in the demo that Troy alluded to. And WannaCry was a global event. It affected over 250,000 machines and endpoints. 2018, we jumped to Triton. It's actually a human life threat. Triton was aimed at nuclear plants and facilities, and they were able to get in with ransomware. And it's, hey, if you don't pay us the ransom, we're going to actually hurt people. Very, very kind of scary there. Also, 2018, we have ransomware as a service. It may have been around even prior to that, but what ransomware as a service is a hacker can go out on the dark web, and if he's not very skilled, he can go and find a way to download already prepackaged ransomware and use that to start making money. So they don't have to be experts. In fact, as kind of already alluded to, they're trying to be more experts in marketing somewhat with offering these discounts and that type of thing. But yeah, they're not, you don't have to be sophisticated. It's very easy to get access to these tools. And where are we headed in the future, 2020 and beyond? Probably looking at the endpoints. And I'm sure everybody's hearing about IoT, Internet of Things devices, and we believe that hackers are going to start targeting those because that's where a lot of the data is going to live.
Hey, Matt and Dave, it's really interesting talking about the history and what's expected to come here, IoT and edge devices. Any idea how many variants of ransomware exist out there today?
Well, that's a great question, Troy. I mean, I don't, and I think we've looked at a little over 300 different variants of ransomware, and it put together solutions for like 140 of them. But I don't think we've even scratched the surface of it. I mean, it seems like there are so many. You can have one core that gets released, and if the code gets out, then everybody starts tweaking the code and they make little changes to it, and you end up with this. It's almost unlimited number of possibilities for different ransomware variants. I don't know, Matt, what do you think? Are you seeing the same type of thing?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, David. I mean, it's really tough to say how many there are out there, but you hear about new ones all the time, and we really expect that trend to continue. We think we're going to see more, not less, in the coming years.
So would you put it, Matt, that, and sorry to interrupt on Troy there, would you put it, is it because of the cryptocurrency? Is that the big jump up, or is it because they see financial incentive here, or what do you think is the real kicker for this one? That because I mean, look in 2014, yeah, there were a few out there, and it wasn't, there wasn't a lot, it wasn't crazy. You look at it today, and I mean, it's like every couple hours you see another company's got hit or attacked that way. What do you think is the big driver for that change?
I think definitely a couple things you mentioned, right? The financial implications there, but also as we touched on already, it's sort of the ease of use. They don't have to be very skilled to get this ransomware on the systems, and a lot of it is delivered through email. And people, we know we all like to click links, right? So we're trying to learn and change that behavior, but that's tough. And enterprises in particular still are heavy email users. I know social media apps, they're a big deal for personal use, but in the enterprise, I don't know about you, David, but I have a ton of email every day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about the ease of use, but I mean, you think about those little ransomware as a service, the little packages that they sell. I know they just had an article that was released out there on it talking about, it's a $39 package you can buy, and it includes the code. The ransomware includes the email addresses, it includes the website, and it includes payment processing. And the one I was looking at, the person that was sponsoring this, they're like, yep, we take half of all ransoms collected, we spit the other half out to whatever account you give us. That way, it takes away some of that risk too for the person pushing it out there, because all of the payment collection and all the laundering of the money is all being taken care of by somebody else.
Yeah, they're certainly making it simple. I think that is a big factor for sure.
Okay, very, very interesting. Let's take a look at the 3 areas where NetApp can help against ransomware.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Troy, and thanks for the question there. So when we talk about the NetApp solution for ransomware, you're really looking at 2 different things. One is, can you detect and prevent ransomware in the first place, right? If you can, all the better, but in the worst case, if you do get hit ransomware, how can you recover quickly? Because that downtime, we keep going back to that downtime. We don't want to be down and have your business down, so we want to recover quickly as fast as possible. So at NetApp, we like to talk about taking a zero trust approach to security in general. What that means is, if you think about maybe 10, 15 years ago, typically you had a firewall, you had your corporate network, and then the WAN, everybody on the outside. And generally, everybody inside the corporate network, 10, 15 years ago, they were sort of trusted, right? You're on the inside the network, you must not be a bad guy. That's just really not the case today. So we recommend a zero trust approach, which is saying secure all the endpoints, anything coming in, secure it internally, just don't trust anybody, essentially make them verify first. And we have something called in ONTAP, our F-policy feature, which we call our NetApp Zero Trust Engine. And it can be used to do a lot of things, but in particular for ransomware, it can leverage something called User Behavioral Analytics, or UBA. And what those are is a way to see if a user is doing something abnormal for what they typically do. And you can set up policies on that, and I'll get more into that on the next slide. Another thing a policy server can do is it can integrate with a SIEM system, Security Information and Event Management System. And I do also want to mention here, I talked about F-policy. We do have a product release not too long ago called NetApp Cloud Insight, using something called Cloud Secure. It can act as an F-policy server. We'll see on the next slide that all the different partners we have for F-policy. But what can you do as well to see that there's indications of something going on in ransomware? There's 2 key areas to look at. We'll look at these in the demo as well, but the rate of change in your snapshots is a very good indicator. If you start seeing a very large percentage of change in snapshots, think about what ransomware is doing. It's actually encrypting all the files, and that is creating basically 100% change. You'll see that in snapshot. So you'll see a lot of changes in snapshot. Same thing with storage efficiencies, your deduplication and compression. If all the files at the host side are encrypted, you can't really deduplicate those blocks within ONTAP. There's no way to see past the file encryption, and so you lose deduplication as well. Those are great indicators. But let's talk more about F-policy. You can see our vendors on the bottom right that we do support, but it actually has 2 modes. Now, F-policy is a feature in the ONTAP system, and it comes along for free, and you can use it in native mode, which is completely free. Native mode allows you to do blacklisting. So if you know that the ransomware is using particular file extensions like WannaCry did, you can actually block that file from being created. In fact, if you have native F-policy mode and you get hit with ransomware and it does have an extension, you can very quickly go ahead and stop the bleeding, create an F-policy rule. But we also support whitelisting capability. What does that mean? Whitelisting is actually saying, okay, I'm only going to allow on this share or export, NFS export, PowerPoint, Word, Excel documents, and nothing else. And it's a way of having just those particular files. However, what the hackers are getting more sophisticated, what they're doing, a lot of times now they don't necessarily change the file extension. A lot of times they will open the file, encrypt the contents, and close it. And blacklist and whitelist really isn't going to help you in those situations. And this is where F policy comes in external mode. So the external F policy server, native mode, again, it just runs on the NetApp controller. It's just a feature you enable. But the external F policy server is when you would use one of these third-party vendors or the NetApp Cloud Insights product I mentioned. What it does is when the client sends a request over sys or NFS, it creates an F policy event. And the server looks at that. Let's take the example of a day zero ransomware attack or ransomware attack that doesn't have an extension. In that case, the F policy server would say, oh, this user is trying to access and open a whole lot of files they don't normally do. It's outside of their normal workload. We're going to go ahead and block that user from continuing that. In fact, you could set it very restrictive in the first open that they try to do. It could block that potentially. F policy servers are also great third parties because they're kind of like antivirus definition, where they continuously go ahead and update as they know about new ransomware variants. So you can get an idea of what the signatures are, that type of thing. And so that's a way that you can use F policy to stop ransomware even for day zero attacks.
Hey, Matt, what do you see most customers adopting? Do you see most of your customers adopting the native mode, at least as a starting point? And then if they decide that's not enough, add in one of the other things, or do you see them jumping right into one of the third-party add-ins or the partner add-ins that are going out there to get a more secure policy, or does it depend on what environment they're in?
Yeah, it's very actually dependent on cost. And what we typically find is that customers that are being proactive usually enable the native mode first. But anyone that's actually been hit by a ransomware attack already and already been through it, they typically go ahead and try to leverage the F policy server in the external mode.
Okay.
You know, sometimes we talk about budgets could be a problem, right? So it could really come down to, do you have the budget? Because there is a cost with that third-party server, whereas the native mode is free.
Okay.
Great question there. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about that's how we can detect and help prevent ransomware. But what happens if you actually get hit by ransomware? So this is where we talk about remediation, and this is the way we recommend that you go about it. If you do get hit, we say, you know, contain, then prepare, then recover. If you jump right to the recover, you could end up in a situation where it actually, you know, you restore the files that you need to restore, and then they get right infected with the ransomware again. So we recommend, you know, contain it, but figure out what's infected, disconnect it from the network, run your anti-malware, antivirus on those machines, and go ahead and patch them. Typically, it's a software vulnerability that leads to the ransomware infection. Get everything patched, then restore. Otherwise, it could be a little tricky. Also, so let's talk about snapshots. Snapshots are a way of backing up on the NetApp ONTAP system. I already mentioned how you can detect abnormal growth in snapshots. Potentially ransomware is running in the environment. And snapshots allow you to restore prior to infection. The big thing I want to call out about snapshots, though, is they can't be infected by ransomware. They are actually read-only. So they can't be written to. Snapshots are read-only, and while you can delete them, you cannot actually encrypt them with ransomware. Now, I'm going to touch on the deletion portion on the next slide, a way to not worry about the snapshots being deleted. But what I do want to call out here is that NetApp snapshots are a little different. You know, a lot of storage vendors have snapshots, but we have snapshots that are based on pointers, you know, and the pointer system, when you think about it, let's take a look here at blocks A, B, and C. That's the original data that was written. And we took a snapshot of that, snapshot copy 1. Let's say that ransomware came in and it encrypted the file on block B and encrypted the file on the block C. So the active file system now is A, B1, and C1. You can simply go ahead with your snapshot and say, no, I want to point back to A, B, and C. So you're not having to copy that data from B1 back into the active file system or C1 back to the active file system. You're simply changing the pointers. And by changing the pointers, it happens very, very quickly. You know, it happens in a snap, basically. So I've seen multiple terabytes restored very quickly. I did talk about the danger of snapshot deletion. And, you know, if you happen to have snapshots deleted, you can't restore from those. So we do offer a feature called SnapLock. Now, SnapLock is used for more than just ransomware. It's our compliance solution. It's a worm solution. There's actually two variants of it. SnapLock Enterprise prevents the user from deleting something written to worm. However, an administrator on the system could actually go ahead and delete that volume with SnapLock Enterprise, and potentially that when the volume's deleted, obviously you would lose that snapshot to be able to restore from. Also, you could lose your data as well. SnapLock Compliance Mode, however, does prevent that. So even an administrator cannot go ahead and change that data. Once the data is written in SnapLock Compliance, there's no way to have it removed. And so we recommend storing your snapshots in some sort of retention for SnapLock Compliance. Just be careful on the default retention is 30 years. And if you accidentally commit a file to worm for 30 years or a snapshot and call support and say, hey, I need to uncommit this with SnapLock Compliance, you can't do that. Let's talk a little bit about our SnapCenter product. So as policy, like I mentioned, it's file-based, but as far as snapshots, you can restore databases or files. When you think about a database, it has transactions, right? Transactions that are going on. So you need a clean and consistent snapshot to be able to restore from. If you just take a snap from the command line of like one of these databases here, it may have been in the middle of a transaction. That's where SnapCenter comes in. It's same thing for databases, even VMs as well. SnapCenter will allow you to go ahead and pause I/O temporarily, very, very small amount of time, well within the tolerances, and take a clean snapshot so that you know when you go to restore, you'll be able to do that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about data protection strategy overall. We've been talking a lot about using snapshots as a backup, but obviously if you store a lot of snapshots, it can be a little bit expensive from a storage perspective, depending on how long you keep them, and that's where things like SnapVault come in. You also don't want to have all of your eggs in one basket. You know, you don't want to have all of your backups probably on the local side, on the local system. So we definitely recommend, you know, either another data center, you could mirror SnapVault to, or if you can use cloud on tap as well with all the hyperscalers nowadays. So if you want to be in a big cloud provider, you can do that. We also have a product called Storage Grid. Storage Grid allows you to use Fabric Pool to tier your snapshots to it, so you can have some space savings there. And then you'll see at the bottom all the different backup vendors we have. If you want to go ahead and archive items off to tape or some other backup format, all these guys integrate with us, and it's a way of you know, potentially cheapening the cost of keeping the backup.
Matt, with being able to mirror, SnapVault off, snapshots and stuff like that, does NetApp provide like best practices for people that are doing that so they can avoid like a ransomware infection or somebody getting access to it?
Yes, we actually do. We have a NetApp TR that kind of goes into the details, but in general, what we've been saying, or I've been telling people, is try to keep at least more than a month's copy. If you can keep anything more than a month, maybe 6 weeks, because a lot of the attacks I've seen that sit around for a while, they try to go attack end of month, right? They wait for the company to do end of month runs. So at least do that, but you know, if you can do it, 6 months is great.
Awesome.
Great question. Thanks, Dave. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the good stuff. I have a demo here to share with you guys today. And in the first demo, go ahead, Troy.
I was going to say, as you're setting that up, Matt, a quick question, Dave. Do you ever hear about the size of the ransomware amounts when you get involved in recovery situations, as far as like what the customer is faced with for paying a ransomware amount, and what's the largest ones you've seen, Dave?
That's a great question. I mean, for us, I see more of that in the news because the big ones take the thing. I think the last one that came out, the big one was like 85 million was what they were looking at, and I'm not sure if that was the actual ransom payment or that was ransom plus their response time to put it out. For us, I think the number that Matt wrote was like 87,000. That's pretty common. The ones that have shared with us, we just did one about 2 weeks ago, and the customer said the decryptor cost them 16,000, and that was a single share that got hit in their environment, and that's what they were asking. And that was the negotiated amount that they came up with, that customer. I don't know, Matt, maybe you guys see more of that than we do. A lot of times they don't tell us. Well, we get the mix. A lot of times they don't tell us what they've done with it. They don't tell us that they paid the ransom. and they don't tell us the amounts. What about you? Do you guys see that much?
Yeah, we actually most of ours comes from the news as well, because in general, if they're coming to us, you know, it's they usually have a snapshot to potentially restore from, or if they don't, they're heading to guys like you. They're saying, "Hey, we've got no backups. How can you help us here?"
Okay.
Yeah, the biggest one I'm familiar with is the Niana one. It happened in 2017. It was a Korean web hosting firm, and I believe they paid about 1.4 million ransom. And in the end, they ended up giving free services to, I think, most of their customers for life that were affected by it. So, yeah, it can be very, very, very costly, obviously. All right, Matt, you want to jump into your demo?
Yeah, I just do want to add one more thing to that too, Troy. The other thing is it can also be damaging credibility-wise as well, right? So especially if you do end up in the news. It's not only the financial cost you need to consider, but also, you know, the potential impact of, you know, how customers think about your business. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can definitely affect reputation severely, or, you know, even, you know, I'm sure there's cases where companies have went out of business because of it. So.
Yeah, excellent. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into the demo here. Now, in this particular demo, we're actually going to use the F policy that I talked about in native mode. So what we're looking at here is a virtual machine, and we have a CIF share on the Windows system. Sorry, we have a CIF share on the NetApp system, excuse me. That's the Z drive we're looking at now. You can see it's got regular files in there. I'm going to quickly kick off this F policy first. Now, I'll talk about the details of what's going on here in a second in the F policy events, but we're going to need to kick off our ransomware. So let me go ahead and protect the ONTAP system first. Now, this is going into PowerShell. Through PowerShell, we're connecting to the ONTAP cluster, and we're saying create this native F policy event. That should protect the CIF share. Now, it's not going to protect the local files in the Windows system, but it should protect the CIF share. Now we're going to go ahead, and this is the WannaCry virus. We're going to kick it off. You saw there was a password there when I was recording this. I didn't want to accidentally bomb my own lab environment. So in this case, yeah, so you see the .WannaCry files. Those are the files being encrypted. Now let's go ahead and look at this a little closer. So we're saying on the CIFS protocol, for any create, rename, or write on this particular vServer SVM named financial, we want to block the extensions WannaCry, Locky, and 84C. So this is a native blacklist rule. Now you notice I didn't actually block executable or configuration files, so I do expect those WannaCry files to make it onto my Windows share. Now on the local system, it's already begun to encrypt. Obviously, deleted the originals, and you end up with just the WannaCry files. When you look at the CIF share mounted on the Z drive, we should not see WannaCry files because we have that native F policy in place. Yep. We're not seeing those. However, we do have the executable, which is the application file, and the configuration file. So new files were actually put on there, but it cannot change the actual document to WannaCry. Storage efficiency should not drop. See, we got 16% overall, with 14% of that coming from dedupe. Snapshot copies should remain very small. Yeah, there's 17 megs, so we're not seeing a large snapshot size change here, again, on the CIF share. Now, it just so happens the virtual machine is sitting on a NFS data store, so we're going to be able to restore from that later, but we have to speed this up in this case. Ransomware does take a while to actually encrypt all the files in the local system, so we're speeding that up by a factor of 10x here. What you may also see as an indication, this is the virtual machine. If you see virtual machine memory or CPU spikes, that could also be an indication that you have ransomware going on in the virtual machine, because encryption is actually a very cost, you know, has a high cost to it when it comes from resource standpoint. All right, again, on the CIF share, no files are encrypted, and we see in the background it's already kind of changed. The ransomware is starting to finish up. All the files are almost encrypted there. Take a look at the CIF share, though, and again, they're good to go. No change really in our dedupe storage efficiencies or our snapshots. And this is what it looks like at the very end when WannaCry has finished. And you can see it's asking for Bitcoin there. And if you ever see this, it does make for a very, very bad day at the office. However, that's not the end of the story. We can recover. So what we're going to pick up with here is almost exactly where we left off, except that this time I ran the same simulation, but with F policy. I did not have that event on there. This was with F policy off. So my CIF share also got encrypted. And the reason why I want to show you that is I want to show you how long it takes to restore and also show you what the storage efficiencies look like. So in this case, we're picking up pretty much where we left off, except the CIF share, we do expect to see it encrypted as well. Now we're in vCenter here, and you can actually launch SnapCenter right from vCenter. I talked about SnapCenter earlier. It's a way to get consistent application consistent snapshot for VMs or databases. And so we're actually going to use SnapCenter Restore. It's nice that you can launch it right here, right within vCenter. You don't need a separate application to do that. We're looking for a VMware snapshot that says yes, because we know that's application consistent. Sometimes you can restore from the other snapshots, but it's best not to take a chance on that. I have a feeling that our friends at Ontrack could restore from it, no problem. They're just good like that. But anyway, we'll go ahead and start the restore here. We can restore the entire virtual machine. You could just restore the hard disk if you wanted to. We're going to go ahead and kick that off and let that run, and then we're going to focus on our CIF share. All right, so that's running. Now, remember, we had to speed up that encryption process in the other demo. Not the case in restore. We will do the restore in real time because I told you guys snapshots are fast restore. Let's actually see if I'm being true to my word here. And you can look at that latest, newest snapshot rather, it's almost 10 gig. And we have only 1% storage savings from dedupe. So we lost pretty much the storage savings that we had from before. Now we are going to go ahead and restore from snapshot. In this case, it's called before attack. And that's because, it's a lab environment, right? In the real world, more than likely it wouldn't have a name like that. If it did, you'd have to be very suspicious of what was happening there. But so we're going to go ahead and restore that. Again, this is happening real time. This is just pointers. We're having to copy data back out. We expect it to be very quick. You can see it already restored. Look, our storage efficiencies are back. And so we should be able to access that data. If it was multiple terabytes, I would expect it to restore at the same speed. The virtual machine does have to reboot, so that reboot process takes a little bit of time. That's why it's not quite as fast as a CIF share. Let's go ahead and log back into the virtual machine, and let's see if we can actually access our data. We've got to log in because it was rebooted. We get our shutdown event tracker. Taking a look at the files in the local system, you can see the .WannaCry files are gone. Let's make sure we can access our files. Yep. Here's a NetApp technical report. I am a technical marketing engineer, so we really appreciate it when you guys are able to read these. And let's check the CIF share as well, mounted as a Z drive. Make sure that we can access all the files there. It looks pretty good. No .WannaCry extensions there. Again, we can bring up our technical report. So yeah, it looks pretty good. That's how quickly and easy it is to recover with ransomware when you're running on NetApp.
Wow, that's very impressive, Matt. Seeing a live WannaCry ransomware in action and how quickly you can recover from it if you're running on the NetApp in a correct environment. I imagine you want to make sure you're not connected to anything when you're doing that simulation to infect.
Yeah, we have to keep that lab network very isolated. Very good point, Troy.
Yeah, I would think so. Very impressive. And by the way, those technical reports are really good reading.
Yeah, especially at that time if you need the young kids to go to sleep.
Right. All right. So now let's turn it over to Dave from Ontrack to talk about recovery from ransomware from a data recovery perspective for those that might not have these excellent NetApp protections in place. So Dave, you want to go ahead and take it away?
Fantastic. Thank you, Troy. And thank you, Matt. That was good. Appreciate it. So for our side, there's a couple things that we want to cover, things we want to talk about here. And it's really to give you the information you need in case you don't have F policy, you're not using SnapLock, you don't have your snapshots protected that way, or you made the mistake and you're not on a NetApp system and you're on something else that isn't protected. There is a solution if you get infected. So talk a little bit about when Ontrack gets involved. when we do get in, what can we do to help that way, and what scenarios lead to a successful recovery. So when we talk about when Ontrack gets involved, really the short answer is the question that always comes up for us is what's the best time to call, or what's the best time to get Ontrack involved? And the short answer is anytime. The longer piece of that is we usually get contacted after an attack. Something's happened, there's been a data loss event, and the customer's reaching out to us. And it's really helpful from a data recovery perspective if we can get involved before the storage starts changing. So yes, we've been infected, we've got an attack that happened here. We have a consultation with the customer and they say, this is our plan, X, Y, and Z. We may offer some suggestions there, or we may make some challenges to the plan that's going forward, knowing what it'll do to the impact of a data recovery effort if we have to go down it. So we will, the goal is, if we can, we'll stop and just say, hey, is there a way we can protect the source? We know it's been encrypted, but can we stop making any more changes to that? So if you pay the ransom and the decryption isn't effective, can we go back to the original source again, and maybe we change that decryptor, or we modify it, or we go down a different path? Can we still get access to the original volume? And we've got a little case study we'll talk about why that's important, or where that was important, and how it led to a successful recovery. If we can't, are there other things that we can do to mitigate the data? Can we snap it off? Can we do something else to help us out? If we're on a filer, can we actually down this aggregate and have you make a snapshot or snap clone of it, and then down the aggregate so we're not writing any additional changes to it, and we write to a different aggregate instead? And the reason we do that, I think it kind of makes sense. If you're decrypting in place and you don't have a backup of that data, the decryptors a lot of times are pretty hacked together. And when they run, they're going in and they're modifying your file data that way. And if they're not quite right, or they're not working exactly right, they can actually end up causing more damage to the files than the original encryption did. And they can get it to the point where you can't recover it all from them. So if we can avoid doing that, or if we work on a copy, it usually helps us out a lot. The other one that's a big one that we see a lot of times is our customers are in a full panic mode, and they're like, I have a backup, I'm just going to restore the backup, and I restore it to the same volume that we're in. And what we find there is a lot of times those customers, that backup that they have, it either isn't complete, they miss critical file data, they get partway into it and they find that it's corrupt, or there's damage to it, it doesn't work at all, and they've reformatted a volume, or they've reset and deleted the encrypted files out of it. And a lot of that makes the data recovery side of it a lot more challenging when we have to do things that way. The other one is just stop, if a volume is only partially encrypted, stop using the other volumes that are on that same aggregate or in that same storage platform to protect the blocks that are there and keep them from getting changed that way. Go to the next one for me. So what can we do, or what can Ontrack do specifically? And I think it comes down to a couple things. In some cases, we've looked at a little over 300 ransomware variants that are out there. We have decryptors for about 140 of them. So in some cases, we can actually decrypt the files, and we're doing it without paying the criminal, and we're helping those customers get that data back from them. If we can't do that, if we're lucky enough that the customer is on a NetApp filer, we have the ability to recover from before the attack happened. And the way Waffle's set up with the copy on write, it makes it it's like it's written for data recovery. We can walk backwards in time from before the attack took place, or before the encryption took place, and actually recover data that's there that's not available to the end user. So if you had snapshots, let's say your infection occurred, all the snapshots got deleted and there's nothing else out there. For us, the data is still out there. And because of our understanding of how Waffle works, we can actually walk backwards through the consistency point, so we find a point in time where the data blocks are still intact. Granted, this depends. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I completely understood what you just said. You're telling me if I actually don't have snapshots in the NetApp system, Ontrack still has a way in many cases to recover the data?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That is good clarification, and the answer is yes.
That's powerful. Yeah,
it's fantastic, and it's all due to the design in the Waffle file system. It's fantastic because the way it writes, I mean, it's writing, I think you mentioned one of your slides, it updates the pointers all the time, and it actually leaves those old data blocks out in the aggregate until that space needs to be reclaimed. So the good part for us is we can go back and we can find things that aren't, they're not currently allocated within the active volume, and they're not allocated in any snapshots, but the data is still there. And we've built a tool that when we walk backwards, we can virtually rebuild up that pointer list again to point to those blocks that are still out there. It gives us a lot of flexibility, and it gives us a lot of power to go backwards in time and get to data that customers are missing on the aggregate. So if we can't,
Fantastic.
yeah, if we can't do it that way, or we happen to have a customer that's not on a copy on write system and they're in a different, more traditional volume that way, a lot of times we can go backwards and or go to the volume and look at the unallocated space that's out there, and we can find volume shadow copies of files. We can find deleted data that's out there. We can find raw data that maybe doesn't have a pointer to it anymore, but the raw data is a copy of the file the customer is looking for. So even if it's not a filer and we don't have a decryptor for it, there's still a chance to get data back on these systems. And I just finished one last week where we had a customer that came in traditional block storage that way, volumes encrypted, and they were looking for 5 files that were critical for them. We went backwards in time and we found, or not backwards in time, but we went through the unallocated space and we actually found copies of 4 of the files of the 5 that they were looking for. And 2 of them were in, they had a volume shadow copy metadata record for it that still pointed to valid data blocks that were not encrypted. So we pulled back 2 of them that way. 2 of them came from the raw data on the volume, and we were able to pull those back from them. And they weren't the most current file, but they were like 1 generation older, and they had all the data that they were looking for to put it together. Beyond that, Ontrack also has a full forensics team, and we partner with a couple other forensic companies that way too. So if you need help with your investigation, you need help with the intrusion detection, you need help with protecting your environment going forward, that way and making sure that this doesn't happen again, we've got the resources to be able to jump in and help you out with that. So
I think what you're saying, Dave, is never assume your data's gone or unrecoverable. Check with the experts to get a second or third opinion, right?
That's a great summary of that in much fewer words. So no, that's absolutely true. And the nice thing is, the consultation with us, the initial call and consultation where we get the information, scope, figure out project, that's free. So I mean, it really, it doesn't hurt you to give a call. It takes a couple minutes. We can talk through it, figure out what's going on there. We can give some advice or lay out what we're able to do for you, and it doesn't cost you anything to do that. So yeah, I think that's a great way to say it, Troy.
Awesome. You want to touch on some case studies?
Yeah, can you go to the next one for me? So I think 2 of them kind of highlight what we've done or kind of the abilities that we have there. The first one is a CryptoLocker infection, and this is a pharmaceutical company. One of their users gets a bad email, clicks on an attachment, infects their laptop, and then it jumps from the laptop to the department share, and the department share is sitting on a NetApp filer. Not only does it dump to the department share, it jumps to some other shares that are there as well, and basically takes down a good portion of the company because of the infection. Well, they didn't, in this particular case, they reached out to the attacker. The attacker didn't respond. They were interested in paying the ransom. They just couldn't get a good response from the guy. Felt funny giving it to him that way, and so they stopped. Fortunately, they got a hold of NetApp support and said, "Hey, we're infected. What can we do? Can you help us with this one?" They took a quick look and they looked at the snapshots, and the snapshot has been deleted or they weren't available anymore. And support was like, "I can't do this for you, but we have somebody we know." They put them in touch with us, and we did a quick jump into their system with them and got the scope from them that way. And they had 46 drives set up in a single aggregate, and we had them take the aggregate offline. We connected to the secondary loop on the back of the shelves remotely, and we were able to actually virtually rebuild the RAID groups, the aggregate, and the volume. And then we walked backwards in time with this particular customer to find the data that they were looking for. So we went to the point, they were pretty good at knowing when it happened. So they gave us a date and time and said, "This is when we think the infection of the share happened." That way, we jumped to that point in time and we found, yep, we see the volume, we see the encrypted data. We went an hour before that and we found copies of the files pre-infection. And we're like, this is great. Most of them were there. And then we took that consistency point, that snapshot point in time, and we went backwards a little further to it, and we found other files that were maybe damaged in that particular snapshot. And between like 3 or 4 snapshots, we were able to put together 98% of the files pre-encryption and get all that data back for the customer. The second one,
that's really impressive. I think it's pretty important there to clarify too, and Matt, you can maybe jump in on this, that in that particular case, the customer probably didn't have F policy or snap lock in place. Does that seem to be the case on that one?
I would guess most likely. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the particular case, but more than likely, yeah, that's probably true.
I think the same thing. So,
all right.
The other one, second case study, is just a little bit different. It's not NetApp. We don't have the ability to walk backwards in time with it. It's a customer that got hit with Ryuk. They what was important for them was Microsoft SQL databases, and so this customer got infected, paid the ransom, got a decryptor, and then attempted to decrypt the files. And what they found is when they decrypted the Office files and things like that, they worked fine. When they decrypted the Microsoft SQL databases, they didn't work. And so they kind of panicked, and fortunately they reached out to one of their partners, got a hold of us, and we started with just a simple investigation with them. Hey, let's take a look at the files you decrypted and find out what's going on there. And what we found was the files internally were damaged. So they had chunks of good page data, SQL page data inside, and chunks of bad. So we asked them for a copy of the encrypted file. And this customer was smart. They made copies of all their critical data as encrypted before they attempted the decryptor, which was fantastic for us. So they gave us an encrypted copy to go along with the decrypted copy. And what we found on the encrypted side was the encryption had only encrypted parts of the database. So it hit like the first 10,000 sectors. It skipped a chunk, hit another chunk of data, skipped a chunk. When they ran the decryptor against it, it decrypted the areas that were encrypted, but then those areas that the encryption had missed, it actually encrypted those. So they ended up with 2 partial files, both of them having partly encrypted and partly decrypted data inside them. So we took the file at a page level, SQL page level, and actually put the raw pages back together into a third file that was new. And we're able to get almost everything we needed out of it. We found when we went to parse the data that's inside there, we were missing a little bit of the system table information, and I'm not sure, it looks like it got corrupted somehow when they were doing this. And what we did is the customer was able to provide us a backup from a year ago, and we took that backup along with the rebuilt file that we had, stole the system tables out of it, put it together, and we were able to get a full recovery for that customer. So we didn't have the advantage of the copy on write file system there, but we went a different path and we were able to get them back up and running on those critical files they needed.
Those are really impressive case studies, Dave, on the recovery
Thanks,
side. Can you talk a little bit about how the recovery process works, and then finish up with some tips on how to avoid ransomware?
Yeah, absolutely. So data recovery is, in a nutshell, it's really easy. It's a 4-step process. It's the initial consultation. That's the free part. It's scoping it, determining what's there, what's the challenge, and what can we do to help. Once we've done that, the customer, if they decide to proceed, we do an evaluation. We determine what do we need to do specifically with the media while we're examining it. What can we get back from that system, and what condition are those files in? The last part of that evaluation is to generate a report for the customer so they know exactly what they're going to get back before they pay for a recovery. On payment, we actually do the recovery, and then the last step is the delivery of the data. So if we're doing it in one of our labs, we would take the data, throw it on new encrypted media, and send it back to the customer. And then the customer would take that and import it back in their system, get their production systems back up and running. If we're doing it remotely, or if we're doing it on site, we're taking that data and we're either copying it or fixing it in place. If we're copying it, we're copying to a destination that the customer provides, and we can get them back up and running fairly quickly with that. And I think the key on that one is we don't always have to have the media sent in. A lot of times we can do it remotely, or we can do it on site and make it work for the customer. We go to the next one for me. So tips to think about, I guess that if you think about good things to do, I would probably follow like the 3-2-1 rule and maybe add a little piece to it that way. So it's 3 copies of your data being backed up on 2 different media. That way, one of them stored offsite. And I think I would add the +1 to it, where you say one of those copies should be immutable. It should be something you can't change. So like Matt talked about snap lock and the snap lock compliance one. you make that snapshot, you set the retention, you can't change it. No one can delete it, you can't get rid of it. It's there, it's protected, it's permanent. If you've got something like that, I mean, you shouldn't run into this type of problem where you can't get your data back that way. So it's make those backups, follow the 3-2-1 rule, make sure one of them stored offsite, and then it's being smart about what's on your machines and protecting your users. I mean, not only is it educating users, but it's, getting your protection in place ahead of time. So you're scanning your email coming in, you're looking at file transfers that happen between your users and their customers, making sure that doesn't get there, making sure that you're preventing code from running something like F policy on the system to prevent the shares from being infected. And then if you do get infected, it's how do you minimize the infection? How can you stop that from spreading and get infecting more users, infecting more shares that way? Do you have the antivirus and anti-malware software running that way? Do you have like a forensics investigate, like a Carbon Black or a Bit9 or something like that that's running in your environment where you can protect those systems and take care of the data that's out there and take care of those people that are out there? So I think that's about it for me, Troy.
Very, very good tips there, Dave, on preventing and avoiding ransomware. So that pretty much concludes our prepared presentation for today. We just have a few minutes here that we'd like to open it up for any questions that you might have. So please, and thank you, Dave and Matt, for very interesting and relevant information around ransomware. We just have a couple minutes for questions. Please post any to the chat window if you have any. In the meantime, Matt, I have a question, and you might have touched on this. I'm wondering if an attacker had admin credentials, would they be able to delete SnapLock enterprise snapshots?
Yeah, so assuming if the attacker did have the admin credentials of the ONTAP system, they could do definitely a lot of bad things. They would probably, actually with SnapLock Enterprise, you just go ahead and delete the volume so the data is actually completely gone. But I could definitely see them doing that. It's a bad thing if that happens, so that's why we recommend multi-factor authentication for sure. So that if somebody has your credentials, at least they need 2 forms. But with SnapLock compliance, like we talked about, they still, even with admin credentials, wouldn't be able to delete the data.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Matt. We actually do have a question in the chat. The question is it possible to encrypt with a ransomware an already encrypted system, with like BitLocker, for example?
Well, the short answer to that is, yeah, the short answer to that is yes. So when you think about BitLocker encrypts the drive. And Windows is running, if you've unlocked that drive, it's already decrypting the data on the fly as you're going along using that. Those files are sitting on that data, so you can end up with a double encryption there. So basically, it's reading the file data. It's using like the Windows crypto API that's there to write new encrypted data over the top of it, and then BitLocker will encrypt it again when it writes it down to the disk. So you end up with a double encryption there. Like us internally, we have the ability, if the customer knows their BitLocker password, we can actually decrypt the BitLocker level that's inside there and pull that data out, and we can pull the ransomware encrypted data out in its encrypted form, and then we could work on decrypting it from there. So it'd be just a 2-step process to get through that. You decrypt it once to get rid of the BitLocker, and you decrypt it again to get rid of the ransomware. But yeah, that's a great question. But yes, you can.
Wow. Great protection, right? Double encryption.
Right. Well, it's funny, and I think I have enough time for the story. We had a customer that called us that way, and I felt so bad for the customer. They got hit with ransomware, and it was like a Petya or something like that hit them. And while they were trying to remediate the first ransomware infection that way, they got hit with a second ransomware infection. It was a completely different version of ransomware. So it was like a Petya and then a Ryuk or something like that. And it ended up encrypting the data twice. So they had to pay both ransoms, and they had to decrypt the files in the order, and they were running at the same time. So some were Petya first and then Ryuk, and some were Ryuk then Petya, and they had to decrypt them in the right order in order to get the data out of it. I felt so bad for those guys. It was just an ugly one.
Oh yeah, it sounds like. So Dave, real quick, one final question. How long on average does the data recovery take?
Oh, that's a hard one, and it really depends on the scope of what's infected. So I mean, we did one not that long ago on a NetApp filer, and it was good because it was like 40 drives, something like that. We connected into their B loop, and we had the RAID groups and the aggregates probably built within, I would guess, within the first 4 hours. And we were walking backwards in time. We got pretty lucky because the customer knew exactly when they got hit, and we were able to jump back to a point in time right before that, and we found the majority of their data. I would guess that we were delivering data probably, I guess it was like 8-12 hours. We started delivering the first set of data back to them, and within 72 hours, we had all of the data back from in that case. So it's really hard to say. Sometimes you can get really lucky and it goes really, really fast. Sometimes it gets a little ugly and it doesn't work that way. We just did one finished up where the ransomware hit their backup environment, and they had 10 LUNs. They had a single virtual disk on each LUN, and it actually initialized all 10 LUNs. And that one took us 3 days to rebuild all those individual virtual disks to be able to get the data, to build the volume back, to be able to get to the backup files so they could start restoring the data back. So,
Wow,
it's hard to say.
That's impressive. All right, so we're out of time, folks. So please look for a follow-up email to all those that registered, and we'll send out a link to the webinar. It contains a recorded session. Please feel free to share that with your colleagues and reach out certainly at any time if you have any questions or if you have questions that come up following the webinar. But I want to thank you all very much for attending. And thank you, Matt and Dave, for all the excellent information you've shared today. So everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy.
Thank you.